So my name is Daniel Linehan, and I'm originally from Seattle, but I came to New York and I was working there as a dancer and choreographer for 4 years before I came to Brussels to study at Parts in the research cycle. The solo that I made in New York, Not About Everything, was kind of towards the end of my time in New York in 2007. And up until that point, I had been working a lot. In New York, I was working as a dancer, but also as a choreographer. But the thing about New York is there's a lot more opportunities to develop shorter pieces. I had pieces that were 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And it seems, in New York, there's a lot of different places to show these short pieces. There's showcases of 4 artists or 3 artists where you can show shorter pieces. And so I was kind of the kind of rhythm of my work was I would make these short pieces and show them in a showcase and then find another opportunity to make a new short piece and show that in a different showcase. And so I was constantly, I was kind of making a short thing and then moving on to a new thing and performing it once and then never performing it again, or once or twice. And so the rhythm was kind of not one of touring or deepening an already existing work, but kind of making mini short pieces. So then I worked on the solo Not About Everything, which is a little bit, I spent 9 months in the creation process for that. So it was kind of a deeper process for me. And the way I was able to do it was I had some support from Dance Theater Workshop. So I was able, and because I was working alone, it was relatively cheap. So it was something I could do. Whereas other pieces I was making, I also made another solo, but I was making small group pieces, but I couldn't pay the dancers and I had to pay for studio space. So it was very, so that was one of the reasons that I couldn't go deep into the process of making the piece. So anyway, that's kind of the story that leads up to when I moved to Brussels to study at Parts. Because at that point, I had just finished making the solo and I didn't know what I wanted to do next. And it was kind of the first time I was in New York where I didn't have a creative process to work on. And and then there was this audition for Parts and that was happening in New York, and it felt kind of like the right time to do it because all my other smaller projects had finished, and then I was accepted to Parts, and it made sense to move at that time because I didn't have to leave anything behind in terms of being in the middle of a project. So, I was interested in coming to Brussels. One of the things I thought about, well, what I assumed would happen at Parts would be that I would have a lot more time and space to focus on dancing and creating work, which is true. In New York, I would spend many evenings working at a restaurant and also have rehearsals of 2 or 3 hours, very short periods, and would take class when I could. But I really wanted a more concentrated time to take class and to work on creative projects. And so that was something that attracted me about Parts, was that the rhythm wasn't short. And so it's something about New York, it's kind of exciting, but it's also kind of frustrating that you take space when you get it and you take time when you can get it, but it's often hard to find enough space and time. So I felt I was interested in a rhythm where I could kind of deepen my practice. For me, it was good to kind of be with the same group of people every day, and to kind of start to build relationships and collaborations and to be able to work with other people, and it was also I don't know, it was just it kind of gave me time and space, as I was hoping. It gave me time and space to work on my own creative work, but it also gave me the opportunity to take workshops with people like Xavier Leroy and with Bojana Svec and with other people who were engage in interesting projects or interesting research, and to kind of fire my own mind and give me new ideas about different things I wanted to work on. And it was great to be exposed to different ideas, and also to have time and space to work on my own things. It's a difficult question because it's easy to, or it's not easy. I was gonna say it's easy to generalize, but it's actually kind of difficult to generalize. Like, there's different communities, even within New York, making different kinds of work, and some work is more conceptual, and some is very dance-based, I guess, based on dance phrases and physicality. And it's similar in Europe, that there's some work that's very, very conceptual, and some work that's more dance-based. So, I don't know. I think there's different kinds of aesthetics that you can kind of identify in New York. It's really hard to define them for me. I think one big difference that comes out in the work comes just from a different working process. In Europe, there's really a lot of time to really work for an extended period of time, to work Monday through Friday, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, for a long period, and to really concentrate on the work. And the working rhythm in New York is more a few days a week, a few hours. You get time and space when you can, and you work on different things simultaneously, or at least that's how it was for me. I made this generalization that's kind of not true. All generalizations are partly true and partly false, but this generalization of New York maybe is, the work is maybe a little, I say it's a little more impure, there's more things mixed up, and maybe work in Europe tends to be more concentrated on a single idea, or kind of purified to just a single concept and show that. And I think for me, I kind of borrow from both aesthetics depending on the project. For some projects, I have a very clear idea, and I kind of pursue it from beginning to end. And for other projects, I start with an idea, and then I kind of let myself intuitively let that idea go to other places that I didn't expect. I really appreciate my time in New York, and I had the opportunity to also see a lot of work and to be inspired by a lot of different things. I feel one thing is that New York, there's a lot happening, but it's all concentrated in the city of New York, and there's not a lot of work that comes from outside, I feel, and there's not a lot of touring that goes out. That's starting to change a little, I think. And more in terms of contemporary dance. There are big companies, Maggie Maran came, and I don't know what other companies came from Europe. Jerome Bell came to New York, but I was interested in what kind of contemporary experimental work was going on outside of New York. And there's a lot of that happening in Brussels, but also there's a lot of touring in Europe in general, so I'm also able to see work from lots of different contexts and from different communities. I don't know about my plans long term. One of the reasons right now I'm staying in Belgium is because I'm finding opportunities in Europe, basically. It's kind of a practical decision that I'm finding residency space, and I'm finding places to show my work, and so it makes sense for me to continue being here. If I move back to New York at this point, it would be kind of starting over, starting to build relationships again and rebuild networks and things like that. So, so practically speaking, it makes sense for me to stay here, at least for now. And and also, in my time at Parts, I built relationships with people who I wanted to continue working with. People like Thibaut and Salka, who I'm working with now in this project, but also for future projects. There's people who I'm interested in working with. I'm interested in the scene here and what's going on, and also in different scenes around Europe, and Brussels is a good base to be with because it's kind of a central location to go to other places in Europe also. When I was first thinking about the project, I was thinking about wanting to kind of combine things that didn't quite go together, and to see what would happen if they did. Like, I mean, the obvious example is body and voice, but also kind of there's different things in the work too, like, I mean, it's similar to body and voice, but like visual information versus auditory information, and then like seeing the performers on stage and also seeing what they see. And so kind of combining these different forms or different formats was something I was interested in, and so the word aporia, people often ask what that means, and it means basically a logical contradiction. And then I say that zombie means living and dead, which these two things, living and dead, also form a kind of contradiction. And in the piece, there's this play with, we use a lot the computer, which is kind of like thought of as a dead machine, but also, and then we're dancers. And so like our interaction with this dead material does bring about movement and life. And so, yeah, I mean, these are some of the ideas that I was working with and some of the ideas that are present in the title. And also just, this is a side note, but like when I was looking for the title, like, I mean, at first I thought I might just call it The Zombies, because I was interested in creating this kind of rock concert structure. And I just thought The Zombies sounded like a cool band name or something. But then I realized through Googling that The Zombies is a band that already exists. So I wanted to kind of create a new kind of thing that didn't exist. I mean, both like with the title and also kind of my ideas about combining body and voice in ways that haven't been combined before, like to create kind of, I call it like new monsters that haven't existed before. And so like the title itself is a kind of monster, like combining two things that that haven't been put together before, because I Googled the phrase zombie aporia, and it didn't exist until I put it together. So that's kind of a long explanation for the title, but well, it's a good question, because I mean, for me, the putting the body together with the voice doesn't automatically create a contradiction, because for me, like, the voice is part of the body, and so, but they do kind of have separate functions, obviously, and I was interested, for instance, in how maybe the voice could have one kind of rhythm and the body could have a different rhythm, and the two rhythms wouldn't necessarily match, and what would happen if we put those together. Or even simple things like how the body, changes in the body can affect the voice, like if you shake your body, that changes the quality of your voice. So yeah, it's partly contradiction, but also showing how the two things are connected. I mean, and one thing about the idea of aporia is it might be a contradiction or seem like one, but then when you put the two terms together, sometimes they create a new thing. Instead of opposing each other, they create like a third thing. We kind of use voice as amateurs, like none of us are professional singers, and we do some singing and some more just like talking, but I mean, we practiced amongst ourselves and tried to find the best way to use our voices and use our bodies at the same time. I mean, for some of the things, like when we are shaking and singing, like at first it was extremely hard to find out how to support our voices, like even if we didn't sing very loud, like our voices would hurt after we were done, because we couldn't like support our breath and shake at the same time. But I don't know, I mean, we kept practicing and we found ways to do it, but and then at the very end of the process, we worked with this guy named Jonas Kohl, who lives in Ghent, and has studied singing, and he studied this thing called complete vocal technique from this woman in Denmark. And I mean, the technique is kind of about, not about how to sing well classically, but kind of how to sing in different styles, like to sing in a pop style or in a classical style, and how to access different ranges in your voice. And we didn't become experts at this, but I mean, some of these techniques helped us figure out how to do it. And the point isn't to become virtuosic singers or to become virtuosic dancers, but kind of just how to find out how to use these two things, the body and the voice, together. I had already done Not About Everything, which also incorporates body and voice. And I mean, for me, in that piece, Not About Everything, there's this relationship that's kind of the same. I mean, I'm doing the same action over and over again, and basically as I become more exhausted, it affects the quality of my voice. And so that was kind of like one relationship I had already worked with. It's just this effect of exhaustion on the voice. But yeah, I mean, for example, with this thing of shaking and learning how that's very different than spinning, or like, it's not just exhaustion that affects the voice, but like different physical actions that you always have to relearn how to use the voice in that kind of action. And I didn't think it was, like the voice is very, I guess I learned that it's very specific for each action. Yeah, I don't know if there's other things that I've learned. I mean, it was kind of curious. There's this duet with Thibaut and Salka where Thibaut is like manipulating the voice like this and in different ways. And yeah, I mean, it's just like specific things we've learned, but like something you might expect to change the voice in one way actually changes it in a different way. And so it's interesting to be surprised by ways of using the voice that you didn't know were possible. I presented like my basic ideas to Thibaut and Salka about working with body and voice, and also working with different aporia or different forms that form a kind of contradiction or a tension between each other. And we kind of brainstormed different ways of working. I mean, I had brainstormed alone, and then together we brainstormed like what were different possibilities of putting 2 or 3 terms together. And yeah, and I knew that I wanted to work in sections, in shorter pieces, kind of like a concert structure. And so, in some ways it was easy because we could research this thing and just stay on that thing, and then research a separate thing and just stay on that. But then in the end, it was also hard to figure out, like, how does everything fit together, and how does kind of the flow of the overall piece was kind of a challenge because it is made up of shorter pieces. And I'm working with Thibaut Lac and Salka Ardal Rosengreen. Thibaut's from France and Salka is from Sweden. And I mean, in parts I had worked with Salka on a duet called Montage for 3, where in this duet there's photographs that we project, and then we kind of take the different gestures and positions of the photographs to make a piece. And so I had already worked with her, and I had worked with Thibaut on a different piece that was made by Noé Soulier. And so anyway, I had worked with them both before, and yeah, and we were interested in working together, and also we had worked in different ways. Like I feel like I had worked with them on expression, or like, because with Salka, with the Montage for 3, where we're working on like the facial expression and gestural expression. And I knew that in this new piece that another concept that I was working with was this idea of expression. Like, what does it mean to have something to say? What does it mean to like have an emotion? And also like what happens if this emotion doesn't come from inside you, but if someone puts you in this emotion from outside, or what if the emotion comes from a physicality and not from like a story, but just like the physicality creates the emotion and the expression. So anyway, this is some of the ideas that we were working with, and that's why it made sense for us to work together. People have said like there's different numbers or different pieces or different sections, and sometimes we call them songs because some of them are like songs, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had an original kind of inspiration from this concert structure and kind of some of the like energy of a concert, but I knew in the end that I wanted to make a dance, and I do consider it a dance, and it's very much about the body. And so for me it was okay to start with that inspiration, but then kind of go far away from it, like according to, like, not what are the limitations of that structure, but what does that structure open up, and what are the possibilities. All the texts are, I mean, they kind of started from ideas I had, and either I wrote the texts or we kind of collaborated on certain texts, or the texts are based off another song. But all of the text itself is all, it's all new in the sense that like we do take some text from this song Anarchy in the UK by the Sex Pistols, and we take some text from Good Boy, Bad Boy by Bruce Nauman. So we take text from a punk song, and we take from like an art piece, and we also take from a book of poetry. And for me, it was okay to borrow from these sources, but to kind of like, to do a cover, but not a strict cover where we say the exact text, but also a cover in the sense that we can rethink the text and rewrite it in a way that makes sense for today, because a lot of these texts that we took from were written decades earlier or so. So we wanted it all to be kind of like current text. And for each text it kind of sprang from a different idea. I mean, some text is just about like repetition, and it's similar to Not About Everything, that what I was more interested in was the rhythm. So like the meaning could be established early in the song, and then through repetition we can create different rhythms. And then other text, I was interested in a rhythm that was more like the meaning is changing all the time, and there's a lot going on. So each kind of text was chosen based on kind of how I wanted meaning to fit into the song. And I was interested in creating text that wouldn't make a one-to-one relationship. Like if we're shaking, we don't sing about shaking, but we sing about friction, which has something to do with shaking, but it slightly calls something else in mind too. So I wanted the text to add meaning as opposed to like reduce the meaning. In some ways, like the work itself is about hybrids, like putting things together, and I also feel like my history is hybrid. Like I have influences from New York and from the States, and I have influences from Europe. And so I think both of these influences play out in the work. Like, I mean, one of the reasons I first became interested in voice was seeing some of Miguel's work, or working with Miguel Gutierrez, who also works a lot with the voice, and he's an American from New York. And then, but also, I mean, working with Thibaut and Salka, I mean, both of them are European and have European influences. But on the other hand, Thibaut studied in New York for a few months last year, because through an exchange with Parts and movement research. So, I mean, we all have kind of these influences from both hemispheres, from Europe and from the States and from New York. And I think, different artists that have inspired me make their influence into the work, but it's not really it's not only from one location or another, it's from a variety of places. I think I'm influenced by I try to take in lots of different art from lots of different genres, from like dance and from music and literature and philosophy, and maybe that means that I don't go very deep in any certain thing. Like I'm not like a trained philosopher, trained in music, or trained in singing, for example. But I think it's because I'm not aiming for a certain kind of purity, but I'm interested in how all these different forms of information influence each other. And so yeah, when I was in New York, I think it's hard for me to identify one artist or one group of artists that has influenced me especially, but I kind of take an influence from lots of different people, and I can name some of my peers in New York, like Beth Gill or Charlotte Gibbons, who aren't really known in Europe, or when I saw Anna Teresa's piece Faza in New York for the first time, that's the only thing I had seen of her before I came to study at Parts, but that was very inspiring work. I'm inspired by Miguel Gutierrez's work and Juliette Knapp. These are all in the dance field, but also there's directors in New York, work by the Wooster Group is an inspiration, and work by Richard Foreman. And I forgot to mention Terry O'Connor, who's a big influence in New York. So those are kind of some of my New York influences. And then yeah, I'm studying at Parts like Krista Parkinson, Salva Sanchez, these choreographers and dancers who are kind of the main teachers at Parts who've been influential. And who else? I don't know, from France, and she's also been an inspiration. And I don't know, I mean, I kind of draw from lots of different things. I mean, from Bruce Nauman, who I take text from in this new piece. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think there's this idea of movement or change. I mean, on the one hand, like, the fact that I mean, much more in Europe than in New York, like, I'm touring more and also having residencies in different places. So this idea of movement on, like, a practical, creative level of, like, moving to different places, I mean, it has an influence, both good and bad. I mean, on the one hand, like, in residencies, like, it's kind of good to be away from home and to just be focused on making the work. But on the other hand, like, to always be moving to different places can make you feel a little groundless and, like, feel, I don't know, decentered and ungrounded. And so it's hard to find just a balance personally between, like, wanting to have a base but wanting these opportunities. And I don't know, but on the other hand, like, sometimes I do my best thinking on trains or, like, when I'm on the move as opposed to just thinking in one spot. I mean, I think there's something about that kind of thinking while being still and really, like, concentrating is one kind of thing, whereas thinking while moving or thinking while dancing or while working, like, are different things. And I find the second thing, like, thinking while moving, to be, I don't know, it yields more possibilities for me. But in terms of my work in general, I mean, movement and the body have a role, but I think it's true that I'm kind of working with the body as something that has a lot of different ideas around it. Like, the body includes physical movements, but it also includes thoughts and ideas, and it includes language and the voice. I mean, for me, the body includes all these different things. And I think that my work would be centered more on the body and the different aspects of the body. And also kind of on choreographic structure a lot, like how things are placed together in time. So I think I'm thinking of, I think time and structure and the body are kind of like the central formal aspects of my work. And movement comes in there because body and time equals movement. But yeah, I don't know if movement is where I start from, or if I'm interested in, like, a specific kind of movement vocabulary.